5,000 sheets of animation. Numerous rejections from sponsors, leaving the project to be animated by the guy who proposed it, and a film that was banned for some time in its native country, with the master copy allegedly destroyed until a copy in France was found years later, though 6 minutes of the product was ultimately lost. The end result is a film regarded by a bunch of people on the internet as one of the worst anime of all time. Welcome everyone to the Macabre Marathon, where I tackle what some define as the worst of the worst, and see for myself if they are as bad as people say they are. And today's first competitor is the 1992 film Chika Gento Gekika Shoujo Tsubaki, or as other people call it, Midori. Now, as I stated in the beginning, this film was banned in its native country of Japan for several years, but what I didn't mention was the man who made this movie in the first place. Hiroshi Harada, the director of both this and a 1985 short called The Death Lullaby, wanted to make an adaptation of a manga series called Mr. Arashi's Amazing Freak Show, which was written by Suhiro Marua. But as stated previously, no one wanted to sponsor/make it due to the violence/sexual content towards children in this film, among other reasons. So without any sponsors or studios helping him, Harada allegedly used his life savings to make this film himself, which also included animating, storyboarding, and producing the film itself. But Japan does have a point. Violence/sexual content is really bad. So thank goodness we have wholesome, family-friendly content like Elfen Lied, High School DxD, and GeoCyber. See, he likes it. But alright, I've built up to this long enough. Is it as bad as others say? Honestly, no. It's mediocre at best, but it's far from the worst that I've seen. But before I delve into why, let me quickly describe the story. The film stars the titular character Midori, who loses her mother early on in the film and gets taken in by a circus that abuses/takes advantage of her as time goes on, and she is subjected to a lot of terrible things till a new guy joins the circus and makes her his wife in little time at all. But since this movie likes to torture its title character, we find out that the new guy is an asshole and also abusive towards Midori at points, like tearing up an infight that would have allowed her to star in a movie, and by the end of the film, he dies and Midori ends up going insane, with the implication that she killed herself by the end due to the years of abuse/trauma put on her. Yep, that happened. Now, while the story seems simple enough, it's only executed well enough to be passable at best. There is a basic 3 to 4 act story structure, there's character development, but out of nowhere and rushed horribly, and there's exposition, but it's also rushed to hell. Now, a lot of this is due to the runtime being 48 minutes, allegedly the original version was 52 minutes, but other sources say it's 6 minutes were cut, so that would make it 54 minutes, but that doesn't excuse the rushed pacing or execution at the end of the day, because that time could have either been used better, or hell, they could have just added more scenes to increase the runtime so that some of these issues could have been fixed. The only thing that's slightly, keyword being slightly worked, story-wise, was the breakdown scene with Midori. But that was because of the abuse scene earlier in this movie was really painful to watch, and it made me sympathize with her because, well, no one should want to be put through that kind of crap. Her life was a mess, then she found happiness, albeit in a strange and definitely illegal over here way, and then it was just ripped away, with her thinking the husband abandoned her as well since she never found his dead body, despite giving us a scene of her in the location where he died, but okay. But for the record, my money's on a reporter taking it so that they could use this man's death to push their anti-circus agenda. I see how it is. But top that off with her hallucinating that the circus performers that abused her laughing at her, including a hallucination of her totally not creepy husband, and yeah, I can see why she went insane at the end, especially since, well, she didn't have anything else to keep her stale/sane anymore. But regardless of if that particular element worked or not, let's go over why I don't think this movie is as bad as many people say it is. One of the biggest complaints I've seen thrust towards this movie is that it's too violent and disgusting to watch. And while I get that complaint, at the same time, I can understand the reason for it here. See, from what I've looked up, this movie is a horror film as well as a drama, and as I stated in a previous review, the intent of horror movies is to horrify you. If it's doing that, then it's doing its job as a horror movie. That being said, just because there's a reason for something doesn't mean people have to like it, and that's why I can somewhat understand this argument. Just because it's a horror movie doesn't mean they like to see it. But for me, I'm okay with it being here. That's not my big issue. Much like Violence Jack, Midori suffers a similar issue with its horror. The execution of it is not good. Midori's execution of violence/gross out is so over the top and poorly handled that as the film goes on, I no longer get horrified of it and instead just roll my eyes when I see it, which isn't a good thing, especially in a horror movie. Because when your audience gets used to or subjected to poorly handled fear tactics in a horror movie, the effectiveness of the fear emotion begins to shrink over time in your fucking movie. Honestly, it feels like they were trying way too hard to be scary with this, and what could have worked for this film doesn't at the end of the day, due to this terrible execution of the element. I mean, for fuck's sake, there's a big mutilation scene near the climax, and even that didn't scare me, let alone gross me out. How do you screw that up?
You done fucked it up!
And even in the scenario that this was a thing in the manga, then I'm going to apply that issue to the manga as well, because I'm sorry that I don't think that was executed well at all. And spoiler alert, I took a look at the manga for the sake of this review, and minus a couple minor scenes, the movie has pretty much everything from the manga included in it, which also includes the poor pacing and poor execution of the gore/gross out. So yes, my issues with this movie would also apply to the manga version of this as well. One thing I will give a positive to an extent was that I sort of liked the character of Midori. Yes, it was more in a sympathetic way since again she went through something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemies, but it was still some form of empathy towards the character. Now the tiny bit of development the circus guys gave at the end was slightly nice to see, even if it was paced poorly and or poorly built up. Outside of that, I kinda like the music, and while the execution of horror didn't work out that well in this film, the music did a good job making the scenes it was used for effective when it wasn't used for horror scenes. I've also heard some people complain about the lazy animation, and well, yes, the art style certainly doesn't look appealing to the eyes at points, I will grant you that. I'm willing to give it a slight pass here because, again, this was made by one guy. Doesn't mean I don't get the complaints though. I'm willing to give it a slight pass, which ultimately doesn't mean much in the end because it's still problematic. But yeah, this film is honestly just mediocre at best, and frankly, the backstory is way more interesting than the film itself. Even if the lost 6 minutes were reinserted into this film, I don't think it would have fixed the poor pacing, passable story, or flat character/poor execution of violence/gross out present in the rest of the film. I respect the director for allegedly putting his life savings into this since it showed that he was that determined to make this project happen, but that's the most I can give this film because it honestly gives me nothing else to write home about outside of what I just stated. Now, originally, I thought the best solution would have been for the sponsors to approve the movie and make the cuts they need in post-production, but the 2016 live-action version of Midori showcased that even with sponsor/studio working on it, this property doesn't work on both the silver and big screens. Hell, even the live-action Uzumaki got better reception than this, so you know what? Maybe it is for the best that this series doesn't get another adaptation in the future. You tried twice, and you failed twice. But, speaking of horror anime and or manga, if you want that, there's literally hundreds out there that are much better than this film, and by extension, the manga itself. Shiki, Monster, hell, I mentioned Uzumaki earlier, so if you want genuine chills and horrors, look at Junji Ito's work. Just don't watch the Junji Ito collection anime. It's horrifying, but more so in a, oh god, this show is so bad it's terrifying way, and not, oh god, this show is scary as hell way. So no. I don't think Midori deserves this title of one of the worst anime out there. It's mediocre, yes, but at least it tries in a couple of elements to give a shit about what it's doing. Something films like Beauty and Warrior don't have. At the very least, I can say that it tried. Certainly tried too hard on being scary, but again, you tried. So here's a bronze star for the fridge. You might as well put something appealing on there after you laced it with the remains of the goddamn puppies you pointlessly slaughtered. Speaking of vomit, what happened to that guy from earlier?
Oh, you mean that Picasso bootleg? Hell if I know, he just vomited up a body pillow into the trash before saying something about his planet needing him. Regardless, congrats on beating around one of the macabre marathon. Now it's time for round 2.
Hold up. Why does that look like Mars of Destruction?
Oh yeah, did I mention those guys produced the Sovietto?
Of course it is. Of course, they made another one. I'll see you guys next time for Skelter in Heaven. In the meantime, I need to take out my frustration on something, and you know what? That body pillow will serve as good fucking target practice.
Wait, what if it's a good one?
Explodia!
Wait for me!